Today, we're talking about a stars who were here one day, gone the next, with no trace, no goodbye, and no explanation. Their families still wake up every morning wondering if today will be the day they finally get a phone call. Their fans still search social media, hoping for just one sign that their idol is still alive somewhere. And the most terrifying part? Some of these disappearances happen in broad daylight, surrounded by people, which means if it can happen to them, with all their money, security, and public attention, it can happen to anyone. These aren't just cold cases. They're open wounds that refuse to heal, reminding us that sometimes people we love just disappear, and we're left holding nothing but questions that may never have answers. Richey James. Richey James Edwards was the soul of the Manic Street Preachers, a brilliant lyricist whose words cut through people's hearts like broken glass, speaking directly to anyone who ever felt lost, angry, or misunderstood. On February 1st, 1995, he checked out of his London hotel, drove to the Severn Bridge, and then simply ceased to exist. His car was found abandoned 2 weeks later, but Richey? Gone. What makes this so heartbreaking is that this wasn't just some celebrity having a breakdown. This was someone's son, someone's friend, someone who had touched millions of lives with his raw honesty about depression and self-harm. The last person to see him was his bandmate, who said Richey seemed almost peaceful, like he had finally made a decision about something. His family still receives his royalty checks, still keeps his room exactly as he left it, because somewhere deep down, they're holding on to the possibility that he might come home. Fans pilgrimage to that bridge, leaving flowers and lyrics, because Richey didn't just disappear. He took a piece of everyone who ever found solace in his words. 29 years later, people still report sightings, still hope that maybe, just maybe, he found the peace he was searching for and is living quietly somewhere, finally free from the pain that consumed him. Dorothy Arnold. Dorothy Arnold was America's sweetheart before we even had that phrase. A beautiful socialite from one of New York's wealthiest families who had everything money could buy, yet somehow vanished into thin air on December 12, 1910. She told her mother she was going shopping for an evening dress, kissed her goodbye like any other day, and walked out into the bustling streets of Manhattan, never to be seen again. What destroys you is imagining her family that first night, probably annoyed that she was late for dinner, then worried, then terrified as hours turned to days. Her mother never stopped setting a place for her at dinner, never stopped hoping that Dorothy would walk through those mansion doors with some wild story about where she'd been. The police investigation was a nightmare. Her own father refused to cooperate fully because he was terrified the scandal would ruin the family name, while Dorothy might have been crying out for help somewhere. Think about this. In 1910, a young woman couldn't just disappear without help or force, which means someone took her, someone hurt her, and that person lived their entire life knowing what happened to Dorothy while her family died not knowing. Over a century later, her case remains open, a reminder that privilege and wealth mean nothing when evil decides to steal someone you love. Joe Pixler. Joe Pixler had that rare gift that made everyone believe he was going to be huge. The kid from Beethoven movies who could make you laugh and cry in the same scene, whose smile lit up every room he entered. On January 5, 2006, this 18-year-old called his mother to say he was coming home from a friend's house, and those were the last words she ever heard from her son. His car was found the next morning by the Tacoma Narrows Bridge, door unlocked, keys inside, like he had just stepped out for a moment and planned to come right back. But here's what breaks your heart. Joe had been struggling with the transition from child star to adult, dealing with depression and feeling like his dreams were slipping away. Yet everyone who knew him said he was getting better, making plans for the future. His mother still answers unknown phone calls thinking it might be him. His friends still tag him in social media posts on his birthday. The cruelest part is that Joe disappeared right when his life was supposed to be beginning. At 18, he should have been figuring out college, dating, making mistakes, and learning from them, not becoming another missing person poster that people walk past without really seeing. Sean Flynn. Sean Flynn wasn't just riding on his famous father Errol Flynn's coattails. He was carving out his own legacy as a photojournalist who risked everything to document the Vietnam War, driven by a need to show the world truths that others were too afraid to capture. On April 6, 1970, Sean and fellow journalist Dana Stone rode their motorcycles toward a story in Cambodia, and rode straight into oblivion. What haunts you is that Sean's last photos were of children affected by war. He died trying to give voice to the voiceless, which tells you everything about who he was as a person. His mother spent years flying to Southeast Asia, following every lead, bribing officials, desperately searching for any trace of her son because no parent should have to wonder if their child died quickly or suffered. The Khmer Rouge were notorious for capturing foreigners, which means Sean might have spent his final days in unimaginable conditions, far from everyone who loved him. Decades later, his camera and some personal effects were found, but Sean himself remains lost in the jungles of Cambodia, another casualty of a war that destroyed so many lives in ways we're still discovering. Michael Rockefeller. Michael Rockefeller had everything: wealth, education, a bright future mapped out by one of America's most powerful families. But what he really wanted was adventure, to experience life beyond the golden cage of privilege. In November 1961, his boat capsized off the coast of New Guinea, and while his companion was rescued, Michael decided to swim to shore through crocodile-infested waters and was never seen again. The image that will haunt you forever is this 23-year-old, probably exhausted and terrified, making the decision to swim toward an unknown shore because staying with the boat meant certain death. His father, Nelson, spent a fortune searching, bringing in the military, hiring local guides, following every rumor and whisper because when you're that powerful, accepting that your son is gone feels like admitting defeat. But here's the thing that keeps you awake at night. Some locals claimed they saw Michael, that he survived the swim only to encounter indigenous tribes who had never seen a white person before. Did he die in those waters? Or did he live long enough to realize that his privilege meant nothing in the face of nature's indifference? His family never got closure, never got to bury him, never got to say goodbye to a young man who just wanted to see the world. Connie Converse. Connie Converse was creating beautiful, haunting folk music before anyone knew what folk music could be. A brilliant songwriter whose melodies could break your heart with their simple honesty about loneliness and longing. In 1974, after years of struggling to get recognition for her art, she wrote letters to her friends explaining that she was going to start a new life somewhere else, packed her Volkswagen Beetle, and drove away from everything she had ever known. What makes this so devastating is that Connie wasn't running from scandal or danger. She was running from the crushing disappointment of being ahead of her time, of creating music the world wasn't ready to hear. Her friends received those goodbye letters and probably thought she was being dramatic, maybe going through a rough patch, never imagining they would literally never see her again. 50 years later, Connie's music has finally found the audience she always deserved, but she's not here to see it, to know that people finally understand her genius. Somewhere out there, if she's still alive, there's a woman in her 90s who has no idea that the songs she wrote in her bedroom have touched millions of hearts, that she's finally gotten the recognition she was desperately seeking when she decided to disappear. Jim Sullivan. Jim Sullivan was a singer-songwriter whose music felt like it came from some other dimension, haunting songs about alien abduction and leaving this world behind that now seem eerily prophetic. On March 4, 1975, he left his Los Angeles home for a gig in Nashville, called his wife from New Mexico to say he was making good time, and then vanished as completely as if he had been beamed up to another planet. His car was found abandoned in the desert, keys in the ignition, guitar in the back seat. But Jim was gone without any trace of struggle or explanation. The cruel irony is that Jim's songs were about wanting to escape this world, and then he did exactly that, leaving behind a wife and young son who spent decades wondering if Daddy was ever coming home. What destroys you is imagining that little boy growing up, maybe listening to his father's records and wondering if the lyrics about leaving for another world were a goodbye message meant specifically for him. Jim's music has gained a cult following among people who believe he predicted his own disappearance, but his family just wants to know if he walked away voluntarily or if something terrible happened to a man whose only crime was having dreams too big for this world. Amelia Earhart. Amelia Earhart wasn't just breaking aviation records. She was shattering every barrier that told women they couldn't soar as high as their dreams, inspiring millions of girls to believe they could conquer the sky. On July 2, 1937, somewhere over the Pacific Ocean, during her attempt to circumnavigate the globe, Amelia's voice crackled over the radio one last time before disappearing into silence that has lasted over 85 years. The heartbreak isn't just that we lost a pioneer. It's that her navigator, Fred Noonan, disappeared with her. Two people who were probably terrified and alone in those final moments, possibly floating in life rafts surrounded by endless ocean. Amelia's husband spent the rest of his life funding search missions, refusing to declare her dead because doing so would mean giving up hope that somewhere out there, his wife was still fighting to come home. What keeps you awake is knowing that Amelia was so close to making history, to proving that women could do anything men could do, when fate or mechanical failure or simple human error stole not just her life, but her victory. Every little girl who dreams of flying, every woman who refuses to accept limitations, carries a piece of Amelia's spirit, which means that in some way, she never really disappeared. She just transformed into the courage that lives in everyone she inspired. Bobby Dunbar. Bobby Dunbar was just 4 years old when he vanished during a family fishing trip in Louisiana in 1912. But what happened next became one of the most heartbreaking cases of mistaken identity in American history. 8 months after Bobby disappeared, a boy matching his description was found with a traveling handyman, and Bobby's parents were so desperate to believe their son was alive that they convinced themselves this child was theirs, even though he seemed not to recognize them. The real tragedy is that this boy, whoever he was, spent his entire life being called by another child's name, loved by people who weren't his real family, while somewhere Bobby Dunbar's actual body probably lay undiscovered in the Louisiana bayou. Imagine being that little boy, confused and scared, trying to remember if these people claiming to be your parents actually were, or if your real family was still out there looking for you. The woman who claimed the found boy was her son spent years fighting in court, insisting they had the wrong child, and she died never knowing what happened to her real son. DNA testing decades later proved she was right. The boy raised as Bobby Dunbar was someone else entirely, which means 2 families lost their children that day, and only one ever knew it. Glenn Miller. Glenn Miller was the soundtrack to an entire generation's hopes and dreams during World War II, his big band music keeping spirits alive when the world seemed to be ending, and then he himself vanished into the fog of war. On December 15, 1944, Miller boarded a small plane over the English Channel to entertain troops in Paris, and neither he nor the aircraft were ever seen again. What makes this unbearable is that Miller didn't have to go. He was 40 years old, successful, could have sat out the war in comfort, but he felt called to use his music to lift the spirits of young soldiers who were dying far from home. His wife spent Christmas that year not knowing if she should mourn or hope, setting up the tree they had planned to decorate together while wondering if her husband was lying injured somewhere or if he had simply been erased from existence. The cruelest part is that Miller's music still plays at every wedding, every anniversary, every celebration of love and life, but the man who created those timeless melodies never got to come home to his own love story. Somewhere beneath the cold waters of the English Channel, Glenn Miller's final song ended mid-note, leaving the world a little less bright, a little less hopeful, and a lot more aware that even our brightest stars can be snuffed out in an instant. These 10 stories aren't just unsolved mysteries, they're mirrors reflecting our deepest fears about the people we love. Every single one of these celebrities had someone waiting for them to come home, someone who went to bed that first night thinking they'd see them tomorrow, someone who still flinches every time the phone rings late at night. The truth is, we tell ourselves these stories because we need to believe that famous people are somehow protected from the random cruelty that can strike any of us. But they're not. Money can't stop a plane from disappearing over the ocean. Fame can't prevent someone from walking out their front door and never coming back. Success can't guarantee that the people who love you will ever know what happened to you. What haunts me most is that right now, as you're watching this video, someone somewhere is experiencing that first moment of panic when their loved one doesn't come home on time. And maybe that person will never come home at all, joining the thousands of people who vanish every year, leaving behind nothing but questions and the unbearable weight of not knowing. These celebrities may be gone, but their stories live on as warnings, as reminders to hold the people we love a little tighter, to say the words that matter before it's too late. Because the only thing scarier than these unsolved mysteries is the possibility that one day someone might be telling your story too.